I wasn't planning on it. She's here. For their social media. Yeah. Do you have the official one?
I have.
No, but Callie, do we have the proclamation, the official proclamation that you can sign and give to them?
Get that.
Okay. We can do this one with all my hands crossed out. I'm just gonna say hands. Whereas.
Just how do you write a proclamation?
It's not 40. It's before that. Just need to. It looks like it's on.
Carrie, we have our guest from Woodbury arriving. We have our guest from Woodbury arriving. You can't see him.
Yes.
All right. Do you want me to make his life miserable by asking like weird, obscure questions? No. All right. Fine.
Stick around for that.
So I really don't have much background on this. So the Dog Beach.
Really just talking to I'm happy to go into the whole background.
No, but just so I understand, is it currently open?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So if you vote this down, then presumably status quo remains.
Well, except the language says.
Right. Right. So this is making a decision to keep it open, subject to installing these things. Then they'd just be open. If you that's how I would say. Yeah.
It's on at 8.5 by 17, so I'll get that.
Close it. Yeah. Absolutely.
So we won't have first.
No, we need to have first.
Okay.
Sherry's here.
Okay. Okay.
Pretty sure that's how it works.
The
Yeah.
boss seal. Okay. The way that's set up, it's going to print on it 8.5 by 14. It's a legal document. Is that how you want it?
And I was kidding. Call that sarcasm.
I understand that. So many things to do.
In that workshop, it's like, I was just thinking this right, like, oh my God, this guy goes,
You'd have to know a lot about it, but why would
Finance director in Lane, I think, something like that. Yeah.
that would give him a good background for it too?
Yeah.
Because I would think, yeah.
I spent hours in a room with him over the last few weeks negotiating a fire contract, and they helped do the numbers for us. Yeah. So. Yeah, me too. And he's a nice guy. And he's a nice guy too. Yeah.
I gotta wait for Kelly to get back to you. Okay.
I don't think you guys, we had this meeting about construction guys, bond guys, all the people.
Schemers and dreamers, still permitted in politics. Only a couple of them. If I can get one a month, one a year, I'm probably okay.
She's doing, I don't know if she knows we're gonna do a photo.
Yep.
Millions of dollars in building processing, bond stuff. My knees are this isn't cool.
Good. All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. Will the clerk? We'll call the meeting to order. Will the clerk please note those in attendance?
All will be noted with the exception of Councilmember Engstrand, who is excused for the evening.
Great. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, let's jump.
Into the approval of the minutes. Item 2A, minutes of the regular city council meeting on February 14th, 2023. I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes pass. Item 2B, minutes of the city council work session on February 21, 2023. I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The minutes pass. Moving on to item 3, the adoption of the agenda. We have one addition. We're adding item 4D, which is the downtown mobility and parking study consultation adoption, if you will, the resolution moving forward with that. So with that, are there any other additions or changes to the consent or to the adoption of the agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move to. Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have an agenda. Moving on to item 4, consent agenda. I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended with items A through D.
So moved.
Motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The consent agenda is adopted. All right, jumping into item 5, visitors and presentations. Item A, White Bear Lake Chamber of Commerce 100-year anniversary and proclamation. So I have the great privilege of reading the proclamation, which celebrates 100 years of the White Bear Lake Chamber of Commerce. So without further ado, whereas the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce is a respected organization that has been helping local businesses prosper since 1923, whereas the White Bear Lake Chamber of Commerce strives to strengthen business through advocacy, networking, and education, whereas the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce works with businesses, merchants, and industry to advance the civic, economic, industrial, professional, and cultural life in White Bear Lake and surrounding areas, whereas the White Bear Area Chamber is a leading resource for its diverse business community, ensuring future growth, opportunities to maintain a vibrant economic hub for all. Whereas the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce is one of the largest business organizations in the White Bear area, representing 12 communities. Whereas the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce has served as a conduit of communications between the business community and local government to advance private and public collaboration. Whereas 2003 marks the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce, and whereas, with a century of achievement behind it, the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce is looking forward with a continued commitment to ensure a lively and prosperous community for future generations. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the White Bear Lake City Council formally recognizes the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce in celebration of its centennial anniversary and publicly acknowledges the service that it has provided its 12 communities over this past 100 years. So with that, I would like to invite the director of the White Bear Area Chamber of Commerce to come up, and I think we are going to take a picture. I am now signing the proclamation. With that, please.
I'm gonna be in the shot.
It's kind of an awkward delayed clap, but we'll just move on. Yes,
May I?
please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to say my comment after 15 years of being on this council. When I got here, the Chamber of Commerce had a few bumps and bruises. And there's been 3 people involved in restoring the chamber and making it the organization, I'll be blunt, that is worth celebrating 100 years. And that is Executive Director Sherry Wilson. You are one of those people. Former Executive Director Tom Snell, and the person that probably held it together even more is Maureen Francis. Despite her husband, who's in the audience, sorry, Jim, but those 3 people really turned an organization around, and you guys are doing a great job, and thank you to you and your members. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, let's do one more clap. All right, we're going to jump into item 5B, the biannual fire department update. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I will go ahead and start up the update here for you. All right, so I put on this slide, which is what I do every time, really for the audience more so than all of you, because I know all of you know this. But just as a reminder to everybody, these are all the communities that we serve, which is the city, the township, Delwood, Birchwood, and Gem Lake. It's about 35 square miles. It's over 40,000 people, which makes this a very, very busy department. Go ahead. I wanted to also acknowledge that this year is our 135th year of existence. There's some, in the history searching that I've done, there's some mention of kind of a bucket brigade, if you will, before that, but when it was really first established as a fully fledged fire department was 135 years ago. So things have changed a little bit since this picture. But nonetheless, it was pretty neat. So throughout this year, we will advertise things on social media and different places, kind of recognizing significant events throughout all the decades that we've been in existence. So, go ahead. So I was here in the fall and kind of predicted that we'd have around 5,300 runs. I was a little off, so it was 5,283. And so that is a pretty significant incline. You can see what's happening over the last number of years, and I anticipate that this trend will continue as we go through 2023. Go ahead. So it was about a 7% increase from 2021, which is, we went from 2020 to 2021 with a 13% increase. I was hoping that wasn't going to happen again. It didn't. So the 7% increase, though, is still significant. So go ahead, next slide. So this is what it boils down to. It's remained in the 80-20 range somewhere with both the fire response and medical response. So the vast majority of what we continue to do is medical calls, and we do a lot of them. Go ahead. Our average response time is 6 minutes and 13 seconds for last year, which is still very good considering the area, the size of the area we cover, and the in our locations of our stations. And that's just for emergency calls. That isn't non-emergency calls. Go ahead. So there were all calls, which we just had one prior to the meeting. I wasn't sure how many people were going to be here because we just got called to North St. Paul Fire for a house fire, which turned out to be just burnt food. So they got canceled right away, and luckily a lot of them were able to make it here still. But I wasn't really sure because as I was driving here, we got that call. So, so we had 47 all calls. Those are all the real significant events where we call everybody back. And I'll talk about a couple of them that have happened since we last met in September. So this is one of them. This is the Pine, you guys help me, I'm drawing a blank. Pinehurst, yeah, there you go, there it is. I was like, Pine, there's another word. The apartment building, so those ladders where you see them placed is where we rescued a gentleman out of a third-story window. That window is about like this, by about like this, and he was stuck in the window with the fire coming up behind him. There was also fire coming out. You can see the balcony on the third floor there. That's where the fire started. The majority of the fire was coming out of there. He tried to get out the bedroom window and was stuck between the bedroom and the window and in the window. And so Captain Andert and firefighter paramedic Ricky Vasquez went up, grabbed the ladders, because at first it was just the two of them there. They grabbed the ladders, went up, and then as other firefighters showed up, Ryan Schneider, he's one of them in the back of the room here also, and other firefighters then went up those ladders and were able to eventually unwedge him and get him out of the building. He had pretty significant burns, and while he did survive the burns when he was in the hospital, it was discovered that he also had cancer. And then he chose to not pursue any further treatment and eventually died, which is sad. But the crews did a heck of a job rescuing him out of that window. So I think it's important to note that. All right, next call. Not all of them are terrible, by the way. This is a big wildfire that we went to up in Columbus. This is a wind-driven fire late last fall. If you remember, it was a kind of an Indian summer day. It was very, very warm out, and there was a lot of wind. And it was a pretty significant fire. So Forest Lake Fire covers this area up in Columbus, what they called us for help. And there were about at least 18 acres that were burned here. And when we were on our way there, it was rapidly taking off. Luckily, Forest Lake Fire called a lot of help really fast, and we were able to contain it. But some of you probably remember the Carlos Avery fire a number of years ago that burned like 20-some thousand acres. This is right next to Carlos Avery, so they were concerned that it was going to get into that park reserve again and take off like it did before. So go ahead, next slide. There's a garage fire that we had at the end of last year, and this was quickly extending to the outside of the house, and we were able to stop it at the house and keep it from going into the house. It was pretty close, so crews did a good job. It was a very, very large garage and at least one shed on the backside of it and a gazebo that were all on fire when we got there. So those are some of the significant ones, at least ones I have decent pictures of. So next slide. So as far as the fire calls go, we do mutual aid. We receive mutual aid. This is a split for last year, so it's pretty close. It's not terribly far off. We went 28 times to someplace else where they called us, and then we requested 18 times ourselves. So fairly well balanced as far as the fire calls go. And even tonight, that was considered a mutual aid call, even though it was just burned food. So some of these are significant events. Some are like, oh, you can forget it. Yeah, never mind. So that's what that's all about. Go ahead and next slide. Where we were really out of whack last year was mutual aid ambulance calls. And so we received 106 times for help because we weren't able to get to that call to transport the patient, but you can see we did over five times as many in terms of helping out other agencies. And so one of the things we did, if you remember from the last time we presented, is we decided we're not going to send our last ambulance out of the city, out of our response area, even though there was help needed. We needed to protect our own area and kind of stay here. So even though we implemented that last year, we continue to have a number of calls that we were going to. Go ahead. All right, so as far as staffing goes, you approved 2 more additional firefighter paramedics for this year, which I greatly appreciate. Currently, we have 15. We still have another spot open, and we just are in the midst of a hiring process to fill that and any other openings that take place. And then we have 26 part-time employees. A lot of them are standing in the back of the room right now that we added this last year. And then our goal is to continue to add to the full-time staffing. And so the part-time staff does a good job, but the demands of the job are very difficult. It's hard to commit to. And so as we continue to add more full-time staff, it's the same items that I mentioned before. So we're going to get better coverage as far as response times, increase our service level that we provide just because of the consistency of it, and not, hey, we're trying to fight against other people's obligations. I got to take care of this, I got to take care of that. Reduce stress, injuries, and then it'll help attract people. There are a lot of fire departments in the suburbs right now that are expanding into a full-time staff, which is creating a lot of competition. So trying to get people, attract people, keep people. It used to be if you got a full-time fire job, you were really lucky. And nowadays, there's a lot of options out there. So that's what we're trying to do here. All right, next slide. So this just took place recently. The EMSRB, they're the EMS Regulatory Board of Minnesota. And they've recently recognized us with this award, Certificate of Clinical Excellence. This is a new program they put together at the end of last year. And they have 15 criteria, and at least in 9 of those, we had to get a score of 80 or higher. And if you want more details on that, I can get it for you. But nonetheless, not everybody got this award, so this is pretty neat that we were able to achieve this. So the crews, as you saw, are very, very busy, and we're asking a lot of them, but they're still doing very good work. It was nice to see that recognition. So we ordered, after you approved last January, a new ambulance. We still haven't seen it. They're talking maybe June, maybe July of this year when we get the new ambulance, but that is with all the supply chain issues and being behind and so on. That's what we're dealing with right now. So that is frustrating because our trucks, this particular truck is getting pretty beat up right now, but it is due to be replaced, so we're waiting on that. But we're looking forward to getting it here. All right, next one. Another thing that you approved was to purchase the new boat. So this is a schematic, kind of a generalization of what the boat is. It's a heck of a lot better than the work barge that we're using right now. And so we greatly appreciate that. This will be a big step up for us to be able to have some capabilities when we're out on the water. So we much appreciate it. Probably won't get it until at least this fall. Might not be until next year before it ever gets in the water. So. But the sooner they can get it done, the better. All right. We also got new Lucas devices. So this is a cardiac machine device. We already had this device, same brand name, but this is a newer version. Ours were 10 years old, kind of getting to the end of the life of them. The technology continues to improve and improve and improve. One of the things about this that's very subtle, it's hard to tell with the picture, but this one's a little wider and a little taller for bigger people. So that is kind of where we're at, and we've had issues where our old devices, fortunately we already have these amazingly, and they wouldn't fit inside the device. So this was a good upgrade for us. The mechanical device is a heck of a lot better than any of us can do manual CPR. It's just a lot more efficient. It's consistent. You don't wear out. So they're a great device. All right, go ahead. So it's a community outreach, same list as before, but this is one of them that we did. We did this Safety with Santa, so that was a lot of fun. It's a new event for us. We hadn't done that before. Spent a few hours, kind of scheduled the families to come in, gave them fire prevention materials. Kids got to meet Santa. This couple has been doing this forever, and they're excellent at interacting with the kids. So that was a lot of fun. The rest of them there are all listed are the same ones as before, so we'll go to the next slide. Of course, Hockey Day Minnesota, which took place in the township, but we were there standing by, extremely cold. Some of them in this picture are huddled around the fire. It was really fun. It was a really big event, thousands and thousands of people. They anticipated over 10,000 people. I can tell you they weren't really sure how many people actually showed up. It was a lot. So it was really neat. Really neat experience for everybody. They got to interact with the crowd also and kept everybody safe. Nothing too significant, a lot of trips and falls and that type of stuff, but not too bad overall. All right, next slide. That's all I have for you right now. I'll
Thank you,
stand for any questions.
Appreciate it. I have one quick follow-up. So with regard to the mutual aid, particularly the EMS, that imbalance, is there a particular city or area that's sort of the culprit for where we're going, or is that spread out amongst many communities?
It's amongst many communities, but the majority of those calls that we're going to are for private ambulance agencies. That's what I can say. So the Alliance of the World, the Fairview system, that is usually who's calling us. It is spread out with other agencies, but that's the vast majority.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Here I thought the vaunted private sector was so efficient at making coverage of customers. I guess I have to go back and rethink my economics. So, Chief, last fall, you and Councilmember Hughes and I had a conversation, and City Manager, about the not sending our last ambulance out. So we didn't see changes in the data because the data you provided was full year, and the change was only made in about the last quarter or so.
Correct.
Had we looked at data from the last quarter or since the change was made, what kind of imbalance, I'm going to assume there's still one, but has that narrowed? Has that gotten better? And if so, how much, and what can we look forward to looking forward?
So I didn't compare it to the last quarter, but I can, and I can get it back to you. Just by being around and knowing the call volume, it's made a slight change. It hasn't been a significant change. We were in Roseville earlier this evening, like it's Snelling and County Road C area. So it continues.
So we are going to having to think and worry about our crews being overstretched, not available. Well, we don't have to quite worry about that as much. We have another ambulance in town to deal with that. If that doesn't work, what's your next strategy for us? Have you thought that far ahead or been able to envision what a next piece might be?
Well, so me personally, the answer is more staffing. Okay. Because limiting our response to other cities, we can do that to a degree, but we also rely on them. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be a very difficult position for us to say, we're just not going to go anywhere anymore. And so but you can't pick and choose. You can't say, well, today we are, tomorrow we're not, and we'll do this one, we won't do that one. So it's a difficult position to be in, to be collectively part of a system, which everybody expects, and then not at the same time.
I won't ask the question I was going to ask. Every week when I open up the White Bear Press, and maybe this is just selective reading, but it seems like so the big story is the medical calls, okay, clearly, all the way up. But my perception is that we are having more fires that we are attending, having to deal with. Is that an accurate perception, or is the media covering it differently? Am I reading selectively? What's going on with what we might call significant fires of significance?
Sure. So the answer, because you're not looking at just us, it's kind of everywhere. So there are more fires of significance. A lot of it has to do with the materials that are burning now. You have less than 3 minutes to get out of your house now if there's a fire, even a small fire. Whereas historically you could have up to 20 minutes to get out safely. And that is because of what everything is made out of. Most of what we have in our homes now is made out of petroleum products. And so that is why they are burning. They're burning hotter and faster than ever before.
Is that something we need to be thinking about from a policy perspective in terms of building code, building materials, other things, or is that horse out of the barn and
I think for the most part, it's out of the barn. You know, commercial-wise, we're good. I mean, there's a lot of rules there. There was an attempt a number of years ago to get sprinklers in private homes that were more than 4,000 square feet, but that was eventually taken out of the laws due to political pressure. So there's still a lot of resistance to having sprinklers in homes.
Okay. Last question. You posted a really interesting photograph at the beginning of your presentation. What was the physical location of that first fire barn, fire whatever you want to call it?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I unfortunately, I don't remember. It was near downtown, but I don't think it was at 2nd and Clark.
Okay.
But it was near there.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Walsh.
Just to follow up, thank you, Mr. Mayor, on the mutual aid calls. I mean, the goal is not to get to zero. I mean, because maybe this is the question you don't want to ask, but I mean, there's revenue, right? I mean, if the ambulance is working, and as long, and I like what we're doing, as long as we're leaving one in the city to handle the White Bear call if it comes in, we certainly are getting revenue out of those calls when we go to Roseville or Shoreview or somewhere else.
There's potential revenue. One of the issues that we're running into is just like let's say we get multiple calls going on right now. We're going to triage those calls and go to the most critical ones. Other agencies do the same things. So a lot of times the crews are going to less critical calls, which oftentimes results in less revenue. And if they're to patients that are on Medicare and Medicaid,
right, yeah.
then we don't get much at all.
Yep.
And a lot of times that's where we're being sent. And so it's potential revenue, but the demographics of what we're dealing with, it's hard. So we're just trying to find better balance.
Yeah. And the alternative is the crew sits, the truck sits.
Mm-hmm.
Not losing money, but we're not making money.
Right.
But we're quicker to respond if we needed to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the council? Seeing none. Chief, thank you for the report, and I understand we got a little more business to attend to. We've got some swearing
We have
ins.
some new firefighters to swear in, so I will call them up, and Callie will do the oath as she has in the past. So we'll call up first firefighter EMT Jacob Bogdanovich. He is currently in paramedic school, and he's also on the Vadnais Heights Fire Department. So there's Jacob. And then I'll call up firefighter EMT Mindy Feaster. She's on Centennial Fire, Lake Johanna Fire, and works at Minneapolis as a fire inspector. And then next up is firefighter EMT Tu Lee. He also works at Columbia Heights Fire. And next is firefighter EMT Charlie Penn. He works at Forest Lake Fire. And next is firefighter EMT Evan Young, who works at Montemedi and Vadnais Heights Fire, as well as here. And firefighter EMT Brian Sinclair, who Brian's the more senior person that we hired this past year, and so when he was in college, worked at Notre Dame and Clay Fire, and then I worked with him also at Roseville Fire for a stint back in the day. So we're fortunate to hire a lot of people in this last go-around. All of them are part-time employees that have experience, so it makes it a lot easier for us to get them up to speed and get them going. So, Callie.
So I will have you all line up in front of the desk here so everyone can see you. You can start right there and right this way. All right, so everyone raise your right hand, please, and repeat after me. I, and state your name individually.
Evan Young. Charlie Penn. Brian Sinclair.
Mindy Feaster. Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear
That I will support.
that I will support
The Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States
And the state of Minnesota.
and the state of Minnesota,
And will discharge and faithfully execute.
and will discharge and faithfully execute
The duties devolving upon me.
the duties devolving upon me
As a member of the fire department.
as a member of the fire department
For the city of White Bear Lake.
for the city of White Bear Lake,
Without fear or favor.
without fear or favor,
To the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
Congratulations.
right, so now I'll invite their family or friends to come up and go ahead and place their pin on their badges. Their badges on their uniforms.
Wearing corduroy pants.
All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Why don't you guys go ahead and shake.
Welcome. Congratulations.
All right. Moving on to item 6, public hearings. We have nothing scheduled, which brings us to item 7, unfinished business. A second reading of the ordinance adopting a new chapter 1128 to permit sidewalk cafes. Mr. Lindahl.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. Again, the item, as you mentioned, the item for you tonight is the second reading of the ordinance approving standards and a permitting policy for sidewalk cafes. Just by quick way of background, you may recall that the council discussed this conceptually back at their meeting in January. From there, staff took that direction. Apologize. Thank you for the reminder. Staff took direction from the council and did research in other communities and tailored an ordinance for us. Worked with the city attorney to review that ordinance, brought to you a draft of that ordinance for at your February 14th meeting for that first reading. Also took comments from the public prior to that and during that meeting and direction from the council during that meeting. From there, we drafted a slight revisions that we'll go over here in a moment, but brought for you tonight that final version for the second reading and action tonight by the council. Just by, again, a quick way of review, the ordinance outline generally covers, it defines eligible businesses and locations, outlines an application process, includes criteria for placement, size, and operation of sidewalk cafes, also includes guidelines for businesses serving alcohol, specific standards related to those businesses that serve alcohol, makes permit holders responsibility be responsible for damage or injuries, that could occur outside in a sidewalk cafe, and an enforcement process for the ordinance. Two specific changes that were made from the first reading to the second reading tonight include the term of the permit, which sets an earlier spring date of April 15th, and then adds a clause that gives the city manager authority to adjust seasonally as could be advantageous based on the weather of any particular year. And then the second change that was made, again, at direction of council, was to adjust the start time or beginning of the operations for the outdoor cafe 1 hour back to 7 a.m. So with that summary and update on from the first to second reading or the first reading until now, staff is recommending approval of the ordinance and then the resolution that would allow for summary publication. And staff is available here to take any questions.
Thank you. So a couple introductory comments, maybe one statement, and then a couple things that I'd like to see changed. But first, I want to be clear, We're not adopting any fee schedule tonight. That's for down the road. All we're putting in the ordinance right now is that it'll be subject to whatever the fee schedule is, which will be set sometime down the road, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So there are two things that we noted in the last council meeting, and we had a good back and forth, and I'm not sure where it landed, but I want to throw the two things out there that I think are worthy of consideration of being changed. First is the prohibition on glass. I get the arguments against it. It could potentially, cause a safety issue in the city. It might cause glass to be spread out. I'd like to take the approach of why force a business to buy, plastic cups? Why not let them allow them to use glass? And if and when it becomes a problem, let's revisit it. And if it does, great. But we also have some pretty clear language in this ordinance that says that each sidewalk cafe is responsible within 100 feet beyond where their actual cafe is to keep it clean and pick up trash and make sure that it's kept. So let's enforce that. And then, like I said, if and when it becomes a problem, we can address it. But I have no problem with starting out with glass and just seeing how it goes. The other issue I have is I understand that when alcohol is served, it has to be compact and contiguous, meaning it has to be attached to the building. But if they're not serving alcohol, and we know we have at least one sidewalk cafe that is not going to serve alcohol, that historically has not been directly attached, I don't think that's ever been a problem, and I don't see why we'd want to bake into the ordinance something that would make that a requirement unless and until it becomes a problem. So I would like to see that amended so that, with the exception of when alcohol is served, where it has to be contiguous, anything else, any other sidewalk cafe where they're not serving alcohol, it doesn't have to be immediately adjacent to the building. In other words, there can be that sidewalk buffer between the two. Other than those two things, I like the structure.